Has Kirby Smart broken college football? The one thing that you can't deny, and believe me, I've asked this question a bunch of different ways over the last few weeks here on the podcast, and that is that Georgia, not just because I'm saying so, not just because this is a Georgia channel, objectively, you can look at college football and say that Georgia is at the top of the mountain right now. There's no two ways about it. And all of that hinged on what happened on December 6, 2015, which was the day that Kirby Smart, a University of Georgia alumni, was brought back to take over the football program. Since that time, Georgia has gone 94-16, 56-9 in conference play under Kirby Smart. Kirby Smart has an SEC record 85-15 through his first 100 games in league. That's better than anyone to ever do it. There have been not one, but two national championships, two SEC championships, 6 division titles. And oh, by the way, 7 consecutive college football playoff New Year's 6 bowl games. If we stopped the conversation right there, the case would have already been made about just how incredible a job Kirby Smart has done since taking over. But yet there's so much more that we're going to get into tonight. When you talk about Kirby Smart, and Georgia Bulldog fans know I'm right, one of the things that gets tossed around these days is the phrase King Kirby. Why do we say that? Clearly, the national championships, the SEC championships have a lot to do with that, but it's all of the other things. It's the mythical recruiting national championships that he's accumulated. It's the fact that we see him win recruiting battle after recruiting battle when we as fans, who some of us follow it more than others, may have given up on a certain player or a certain outcome. But we know enough about Kirby to know that he has been grinding, doing everything he believes in, followed through, and finished the job, and gotten that recruit to sign more often than not, which is how he's wound up with what is an average 2.2 recruiting class grade during his time in Athens. That number is pure insanity. When I think about what Kirby's done during his time in Athens, the guy is unreal. You can pick any other coach anywhere else in the country. You can pick a metric. And if Kirby Smart isn't the best in that metric, he is absolutely in the top 2. That sort of achievement stretched out over the last 7 seasons is the sort of thing that you just very rarely see in the world of college football. Kirby Smart told us in 2017, following coming up just short of his first national championship, that Georgia was not going anywhere. And there were a lot of people who scoffed, who had something derisive to say about the fact that the second-year head coach would sit up there knowing he was about to lose everybody seemingly on that team that had driven them to that national championship appearance. It was hard to believe that the words he was saying were actually going to come to pass. But that's what's happened. Georgia has been on and at the top of the national discussion in college football for the last 7 seasons. And it's the kind of thing that we don't expect to end anytime soon, because all you have to do is realize that Kirby just this spring has gone out to the national media and said, I want dominance from my football team. He understands that Dog Nation wants exactly the same thing. He understands that that's what it's going to take to remain in the conversation up there at the top, because the landscape of college football is changing at such a rapid pace. in so many ways that if you want to be relevant, it's one thing in this new world to say we're a playoff team. It's another thing entirely to be able to look at your fan base, look at your team, and say, we have a chance to win the national championship every season. Just because you're in the playoff, that doesn't mean you can actually win the thing. Unless you're new to the channel, you know that I've been saying since day one here that there are actually only 6 to 8 teams in the current layout of college football that can win a national championship year after year, that are constantly in the discussion. And one thing goes without question, and that is that the University of Georgia is one of those teams. Again, just look at what's happened over the last 7 seasons. You don't have to look hard. 85-15 through his first 100 conference games, or 100 games as an SEC head coach is probably the more accurate way to say that. You don't just get there by showing up, by rolling your helmet out there and thinking that the other teams are going to quit. I mean, in this run, Georgia has become the first team in the history of the AP poll era since 1936 to start 12-0 in 3 consecutive seasons. No other school in the history of the sport has done that. That's one of those things that, again, if you didn't talk about anything else, I could attempt to build out a 10, 15-minute segment here on this show about this fact alone. But it's just part of the mosaic that Kirby has put together during his time in Athens. Doesn't end there. You know this. There are numbers on top of numbers. This last season, Georgia ran their streak of consecutive victories to 29 straight games. That is also an SEC record. What Kirby's doing is not just great for the University of Georgia. It's great for college football. It is great through the lens of the best to ever do it in the SEC. And if you are among the best to ever do it in the SEC, you are then, by default, among the best to ever do it in college football. It sounds like I'm talking about a guy who is about to end his run, end his tenure in Athens. And admittedly, Kirby has said he's closer to the middle than he is to the beginning, but there are no indications that his time in Athens are going to come to a close anytime soon. And I've said over the past few months here on the channel that, much like Steve Spurrier said about being at Florida, once you've been at a program 10 to 15 years, maybe it's time to move on. Well, just look at where Kirby is. He is entering year 9, so he is literally right in the middle. So if we looked up, and in 2030 or 2031, that's when Kirby says he's going to be done, would that surprise any of us? No. But what it does and what it should do for us as fans is to put us in a mindset where we're not constantly badgering our head coach and our program about not being good enough, not doing good enough. No, we should, yes, hold them accountable for their performance on Saturdays, but at the same time, never forget to appreciate what you have when you're in the middle of it. And it also should drive home the fact that these opportunities to actually claim a national championship, when you are one of the handful of schools that are actually capable of doing it, you have to take advantage of them as many times as possible. Now, 2023 didn't work out that way for Georgia. You could make the argument that Georgia was one of the best 4 teams, but the thing is, they didn't win the games that they had to win when they needed to win them to get into the discussion for an opportunity to win that national championship. So that is on Georgia. That's on Kirby Smart and Carson Beck. That's on the defensive line. That is where the responsibility lies when it comes to Georgia not winning that championship last year. But that's not the sort of thing that should make any of us dog fans feel bad or down about our program. We understand you have to show up and you have to win. That's the bottom line. But It was an opportunity missed. Going into 2024, Georgia, for most people, is going to be the preseason #1 favorite and the hands-down favorite to win the national title. Now, again, there are a handful of other schools that are in this conversation, Ohio State among them. If it's not Georgia that's going to be your preseason #1, it's probably going to be the Buckeyes. But expectations and predictions are one thing. The opportunity is what I want you to think about here. You don't get discussed in that conversation unless it's obvious to everyone that you have a good football team and that you are going to have an opportunity to compete for that national championship. So the onus comes right back onto Georgia and Kirby Smart, and I know that they know it. 2024 is an opportunity for Kirby Smart, Carson Beck, and the rest of the Georgia Bulldog football team to add to the trophy case, to build that legend, to put another number on the wall. 2025 could be that same sort of story. So could 2026 because of the way Kirby is running this program. But none of that is guaranteed. None of those titles are guaranteed. They have to go win them. And the window to get that done is not infinite. There's a certain amount of time there that you have to get it done. And I don't lose any sleep doubting that Kirby and everybody else in the building are doing everything that they can do to make that happen. Again, we're talking about a program that has won 42 wins over the last 3 seasons. 42 games. Georgia came out victorious. That is a football bowl subdivision record. Again, not just good in the annals of Georgia history, but good in the history of college football. That is the level of achievement that we're talking about here. Kirby Smart has been unreal over his first 7 seasons in Athens. There is only one name that would even come anywhere close to what Kirby's done. And of course, that would be Nick Saban and what he did at Alabama. I'm not comparing apples to apples because those two programs came in and were at different locations when the head coaches got there, and there have been circumstances as they move through those years. That's not what I'm doing, but it is a touchstone. It does give you a point of reference for just how good Kirby and the Dogs have been over the 7 years that he's been there. What's more than what he's accomplished just at Georgia? And let's keep in mind, I'm not going to skip over the fact that among these wins, among this 94-16, you also have the 2021 national championship where the Dogs beat Alabama and Nick Saban. That game proved more than anything else just how special what Kirby Smart has built in Athens is. I've said it here before, and it's worth repeating that, yes, what Nick did at Alabama was fantastic, but when Nick did it, there was no monster in the world of college football. It was a bit of a transition, and then Nick built Alabama into that monster. He didn't have that hump he had to get over. Well, clearly, during this run that Kirby's had, he had that hump to get over, and it was the aforementioned Nick Saban. Quite the mountain to climb. And yet he did it anyway. He built a program that not only was going to be competitive inside the conference every season, that was not only going to give his team a chance to win a national championship year after year. He didn't just get in the game. He actually went and did it. And when he did it, to win his first, he beat the man. Now, what they say, to be the man, you have to beat the man. Kirby did that. And when he did it, that ended Nick Saban's run of national titles. He wouldn't even play for another one. So I'm not saying that any sort of torch was passed or anything like that in that moment, but what I am saying was there was a clear statement made by the University of Georgia football program that they were absolutely in the game every season on dead level footing with the very best in the sport. And on that night, they were better. But then they followed it up with something that nobody else had done in the college football playoff era. When there were just 4 teams in the playoff, no other team had managed to win back-to-back national championships. And Kirby Smart did that with these Georgia Bulldogs. You can't overstate what that means. As great as that 21 team was, the 22 team could be argued it was better. They went 15-0, and they bludgeoned teams along their way to get there. Now, it's up for us as fans to decide which team we want to argue is better. Maybe the 21 team, well, of course, they had the better defense, but the 22 team, man, they had a more explosive offense. And, if you put those two teams against each other, who's going to win? I don't know. It would be an interesting game to watch, that's for sure. So I'm not going to skip past the fact that there were 2 national championships in there and that they happened back to back. And I've talked about Kirby and the University of Georgia being the standard in college football right now from a national perspective. I am not the only voice saying that. Thank goodness. The national media, as I've addressed recently, has finally come around and started to say the same thing. I understand the national perspective. You can't get out there too far. You can't put your cart before the horses, as it were. A guy like me, who is running a Georgia channel, might be a little quicker to get to that conclusion than they are. That's because they have to be. But they're here. They finally came along. And Georgia, on a national scale, outside of those people who, A, don't understand football, or B, are just going to be obstinate and stubborn and be, haters, for lack of a better phrase, outside of those people who don't warrant much of your time and consideration of their opinion, people understand that Georgia is at the very top of the sport. That's a national level, though. But let's look at what Kirby has done through a Georgia lens. What is more important as a fan of any college football team in the country than saying that you beat your rivals? Okay, I'll give you a conference championship or a national championship. We know that. Outside of that, you want to beat that team that you hate more than any other. Now, the thing about Georgia is that there are 3 traditional rivals for the Georgia Bulldogs. And growing up as a Gen Xer, I lived through stretches against these teams that were brutal. Well, at least 2 of the 3. There were the Spurrier years with the University of Florida, where Georgia couldn't seem to get a win. Something funky always seemed to happen, but the bottom line was Florida just had the better players. They had the better scheme, and they won those games. Speaks to the greatness of what Spurrier was able to do at Florida. But that period of time over the history of Florida is not indicative of what that program is over its entirety. No, it was a blip. What Florida is now is much closer to what Florida has been traditionally. But that doesn't matter, because when Spurrier was there, he dominated Georgia and he dominated the conference. I had to live through that. It was miserable. Steve Spurrier and his success, that is the reason that I despise the Florida Gators more than any other team. Then you have the Auburn Tigers. There was a period when I was in school at the University of Georgia where the Auburn Tigers, they may not rattle off a stretch of wins against Georgia, although they did have a streak or 2. But it seemed like whenever the game really seemed to matter, when it really seemed important for Georgia, that is when Auburn would stick the knife in and twist it. That's what makes them such a traditional rival of the Dogs. Not only are they literally just a couple hours away, a short bus ride, right across the state line in Alabama. But every time they seemed to get a victory over Georgia, it just seemed to matter more. Like the stakes were always so high, and Georgia never could seem to get over the hump, at least not consistently, against Auburn. So I lived through some pain there. And then there's the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets. That's the other third traditional rival for the Bulldogs. Now, again, Tech is not a program that has given Georgia a lot of headaches over the years, but the series was competitive for most of my life. Notice I said was competitive. And again, you think the Georgia Tech game is not a bitter game to lose? You think it's not a rivalry? Mess around and lose that game one time and see how you feel. See how the measure of Dog Nation looks in the days and weeks following that loss. It is not a happy place to be. So don't ever discount Georgia Tech, regardless of their record, as to whether or not they're actually a rival of Georgia, because they are. So let's take a second and look now at the three traditional rivals of the University of Georgia against the Dogs since Kirby has gotten there. Kirby has destroyed these traditional rivalries, not the games. I'm not saying he's destroyed the individual teams. I'm not saying they have destroyed the rivals. I'm saying during his tenure in Athens, Kirby Smart has ruined these traditional rivalries. How's that, Randy? How does he ruin an entire rivalry? Let me give you some info. During his time in Athens, Kirby Smart is 6-2 against the Florida Gators. The Dogs have won 3 straight, and in all of those victories, the Dogs have hammered Florida. The games haven't been close. The one that they lost in 20 was one that really nobody saw coming. It just sort of hit everybody out of the blue. I still don't understand exactly how that game happened the way it happened. Nobody was expecting Georgia to lose that game. Florida's a mess right now, though. Coaching changes, issues with NIL and their overall recruiting base. I mean, they are floundering around in a state where Miami and Florida, Florida State, who haven't been able to get their act together for the last 20 years or so, at least that's the way it feels, have now surpassed the Gators as far as relevance inside the state. Florida's a mess. And much like Spurrier had a burr under his saddle for Georgia, so does Kirby Smart. Kirby Smart is going to defeat Florida as badly as possible every opportunity he gets during the duration of his time in Athens. I have zero doubts about that, and I am 100% here for it. The other rival that Kirby's ruined during his time in Athens is the Auburn rivalry. The Dogs are 7-1 against Auburn under Kirby Smart. That one loss happened in 2017, and then the Dogs turned around and got revenge for that loss in the SEC title game to claim another banner and actually make it 8-1 against the War Tiger Eagles under Kirby. Auburn hangs around, maybe, but at the end of the day, they just haven't been on par with Georgia as far as their athletes are concerned. And it's starting to show. The Dogs own the Deep South's oldest rivalry under Kirby Smart. And of course, we're not finished. I mentioned Georgia Tech. Under Kirby, the Dogs are 6-1 against Georgia Tech. And they've won 6 straight with Kirby Smart as the head coach at the University of Georgia. And those games haven't even been competitive. Hasn't even been close. This past season was the most interesting of those 6, and it was never in doubt either. I'm not somebody who has just always bagged on Georgia Tech. I don't like Georgia Tech. I'm a Bulldog through and through. But I do like it when this is a rivalry. And right now, as much as I enjoy winning and winning in huge ways, Kirby's kind of ruined these rivalries for the Dogs. I'm just thankful I can smile about that. It's not like he's out there dropping them, if you get what I mean. No, he's rolling up the W's. But this stretches further. Let's take it to the non-traditional rivals. We can look at Tennessee. Not a traditional rival of the Dogs, but Kirby, 7-1 against the Volunteers during his time in Athens on a 7-game win streak. And much like Georgia Tech, these games haven't been close. The Dogs have hammered the Vols. Doesn't matter if it's at home or on the road. Kirby Smart has just had the number of Big Orange. I was in school at the same time as Kirby. So I don't know if there's any sort of extra juice for him against Tennessee, but Tennessee had a huge win streak against the Dogs while Kirby was in school. So much like Florida, maybe Kirby takes Tennessee personally. As a fan, I do, and I love to see what has happened in that rivalry. So even though it's not a traditional rivalry, it is a rivalry because they played every year for so many years. And Georgia is running the show against the Volunteers right now. Now, this one, I understand some of you might give me a little guff about, but let's just throw South Carolina in there because that game means so much to so many people. And the Dogs and the Gamecocks aren't going to play this year, and that feels kind of funny. But during his time in Athens, the Dogs and South Carolina have played 8 times, and Georgia is 7-1 in those games on a 4-game win streak. We don't know when we're going to see the Gamecocks again, but the Dogs have that series under control during Kirby's time in Athens. There's no way to get around it. So, again, Kirby is dominating. It's unreal what he's doing. He's dominating on the national level. He's dominating when you look at it through the lens of historical achievements in college football, both at the conference level and at the national level. And then when you dig into it and you're like, what matters? Well, I want to beat my rival. Kirby and the Dogs are whipping all of the traditional rivals like they can't be bothered. Big green check mark. Big green check mark. What else is Kirby doing? He's doing more. He's doing more. And when I started this podcast tonight, I asked the question, I'm like, has Kirby Smart broken college football? And you might say that's a ludicrous thing to say. Is it though? Think about the success Kirby has had and how he's had it. I know one guy who certainly was caught off guard when he heard just how good Kirby Smart has been doing during his time in Athens, and that would be Hugh Freeze, the head coach at Auburn, who is now entering his 2nd season. Prior to the game this past season, when the Dogs had to travel over to play Auburn at Auburn, Coach Hugh Freeze was talking about playing Kirby before and what a good job he's done since he's been in Athens, but even he didn't understand just how good a job Kirby has done with the Dogs so far.
Hey, Coach. Kirby's coming in here, 2-time defending national champion. I know you've been out of the conference for a few years, but from afar, watching what he's done and what he's built over there, or what impresses you the most with that program and what he's done?
Well, I played Kirby his first year when I was still at Ole Miss, and I know kind of what he inherited because I coached in that game, and I know what the outcome was, and I think it's a great testament to his vision, to his work ethic, to his staff, to his administration being patient and allowing him to go have the years he needed to recruit, and the dividends are paying off greatly. I mean, they're one of the gold standards in college football right now, and you're recruiting a top 3 class every single year, and that's hard to compete with, and they're well coached, and so you got to give them credit. I know it's a rivalry game, but the truth is the truth, and he's built a dang good football program there so that means a lot of things. Or it means he's got the support from the administration. It means he's got the support from the fans, and I don't know how long it took him. I don't know. What did it take him, 3 years or so to get there, or 4 years? I don't know. Some of y'all could do the research, but his second year? Whew. I don't know that that's accurate, but anyway, so he did it pretty fast then. That's pretty impressive. It's even more impressive.
There you have it. Kirby Smart, in his second season, took the Dogs to the national championship game. Hugh Freeze, taken aback, clearly. He just made the assumption it took him 3 or 4 years, and everybody supported him, and that's what we're doing over here. And in fairness, he went on to answer that question later, a follow-up question, and he said something to the effect of, I don't really worry about that stuff anymore. I'm proud of what we're doing, and yada, yada, yada. But the point is, he was clearly caught off guard because he didn't know just how quickly Kirby had taken his team into the national championship game. In season 2, he got it done. And here you have coaches like Hugh Freeze, coaches all across the country who are taking new jobs, some better positioned than others to have success. But they are all now living in a world that Kirby Smart is running. He took his team to the national championship in the second year. You're at a good program. We're right there. We think you could be the difference in elevating us to that level. Kirby Smart did it. So you can see how a new head coach at a school that is expected to be pretty good could feel a little bit of heat. Obviously, all of this stuff is relative, but it just speaks to the impact that Kirby has had on the coaching landscape, nationally speaking, since his arrival in Athens. And you heard Hugh Freeze make mention of the fact that Kirby is dominating on the recruiting trail. During his time in Athens, he's had an average recruiting class ranking, the final class rankings, when all said and done, of 2.2 during his time in Athens. There's only one coach who had done any better, and he's not in the game anymore. So when you get players and you get them year over year over year, and then you put them into a system with a strong culture and support from every angle, you are going to have success. And that's what we're talking about tonight. The success that Georgia has had under Kirby. It's unbelievable. You could not have pitched this to me in 2016 and made me believe this was going to be the situation heading into 2024. I would not have believed it. I would have believed some of it. I would have believed maybe the rivalry thing here or there. I would have believed maybe one national title, maybe one conference title, maybe one number 1 recruiting class. But it's year after year after year. It's like Kirby said, he doesn't stop. No one is going to outwork him. And it's not just, and again, this is another point that I have made on this podcast time and again. Only one team is going to win the national championship every season. So you had better get comfortable with being able to enjoy college football and enjoy rooting for your team, even in the years that you don't win the entire thing. I completely believe that. I believed it when I said it the first time. I believe it when I say it now. It's about the process. It's about the season. It's about the game. It's about doing the things around the game with your family and friends. All of that is part of the experience. It's not simply about whether or not you win the final game of the year. Now, we all want to. Don't get it twisted. But it's just not like a thing that's going to happen. where you're going to win it every year. The best you can hope is to be in that group of 6 to 8 schools that I've talked about repeatedly, where you know that you have a legitimate chance. And Kirby has done that. And again, even in the years that they don't win it all or have an opportunity to win it all, they're playing in the biggest of the big games. 7 consecutive seasons, Kirby's Dogs have been in a college football playoff New Year's 6 game. That's how you end up with a final finishing ranking, like he was talking about with Chris Lowe a couple of weeks ago, where you stay inside that top 5 to 7 schools. You just live there. That's your new neighborhood. That's where you hang out. And of course, I'm not forgetting they actually did get it done twice, the back-to-back national championships. And people wanted to argue in the weeks following that second national championship how good this team was, how it happened the way it happened, and all that kind of stuff. Because clearly they had won the thing. They had gotten that second title. But people who don't like Georgia were trying to knock it down, rip away at it, and take something away from it. It's ludicrous. But on my weaker days, I would engage in these conversations with these people. And one of the points I would tell them is that not only did Georgia just do this, go 29-1 over the last 2 seasons and win back-to-back titles, not only did they get that accomplished, but along the way, they had the hardest path to do it. In case you don't recall, Georgia defeated every team to ever make the college football playoff national championship game en route to winning back-to-back national championships. All of them. Clemson, Oregon, Alabama, LSU, Ohio State, TCU. Georgia beat them all. They had one 15-0 undefeated regular season in there. And then the 14-1 the year before. It got to the point where Georgia was so dominant in the days and weeks following that TCU victory. The way people viewed the program was with such begrudging reverence that the most snarky sort of thing that any opposing fan could say is, especially this season, after the 23 season, was, well, you didn't win 3 in a row, did you? No. Okay. You're going to hang your hat on that? You're going to feel good about that? Kind of pathetic, actually. I mean, I will take the 29-1 followed up by another 13-1 season any day of the week with 2 national championship victories, with an Orange Bowl victory. What are you even doing? I don't even understand that dig. But during his time in Athens, Kirby Smart has been able to do the kind of stuff that I never thought would have been possible. As Georgia fans, we need to, yes, hold he and the football team accountable for how they play on Saturdays. Absolutely. I will do that. I would ask all of you to do that as well as Georgia fans. But I also want to remind you that all of the success that Kirby Smart is having, he is having at what is arguably the most challenging and difficult era of college football. He's doing all of this at a time when he had to go head-to-head with the greatest head coach of all time inside his own conference. He's doing it at a time when NIL and transfer portal are running amok in college football and mastering his roster in a way that other programs and other head coaches across the country just are not able to do it. Players have more freedom of mobility. They have more entitlement. They have more opportunity to play anywhere else in the country that they want to play. And with all of that said, Kirby Smart is still leading the pack and has the Georgia Bulldogs at the top of the hill as they get ready to make another run at being the very best team in college football again. I just don't know how many different ways we can present this to the listening audience so that they will fully appreciate what it is that's getting done. The bottom line is none of us know where any of this is going to go over the next few years, and we're all going to have to wait and see. NIL and transfer portal have undoubtedly changed the game and leveled the playing field in many ways. But to think that either one of those things single-handedly is going to be the undoing of a program like what Kirby has built at Georgia would be short-sighted and misguided at best. I am not at all short-sighted or misguided about the fact that I appreciate each and every one of you for being here with me each and every week as we do the live video recording of the How About That DawgsCast. And to that point, I would like to say once again that we are on the march to 10K here on YouTube as far as our subscriber count is concerned. Please share these videos around with your friends, other members of Dog Nation, or anybody else that you think enjoys good college football discussion, because we are doing our very best to give you the best product we can each and every week. This is not only a video podcast, we also live in audio-only form, and you can find us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you enjoy listening to your podcast. It should be easy enough to find. Just download it, take us with you anywhere you want to go, and don't miss a thing about the dogs as far as the How About That DawgsCast is concerned. And of course, there is the newsletter out there. If you haven't yet, please jump into the description below, find the link and sign up for the newsletter. That's where all the coolest things come from as far as a Damn Beast Media is concerned. Your one-stop shop for everything you need to know. And as I always like to say, we couldn't do this. I could not do this if it weren't for the people who choose to support this channel, whether it's through likes, shares, comments on the videos, but also through memberships here on the channel. And these people who choose to support the channel with memberships are the people who motivate me to show up and do my very best for you each and every week. I love the dogs, but this is something that certainly helps me stay motivated to give you all the dogs content I can possibly bring you, especially here in the long, long off season. So there you have it. Kirby Smart is absolutely killing it at the University of Georgia right now. And I know how it's going to go. I'm going to blink and this era is going to be over. And I'm going to look back on it and say, man, I am glad I got to live through that era of Georgia football as a University of Georgia alumni, because let's just say football is the beating heart of the university for me. And the fact that things are going so well right now just helps me to enjoy my allegiance to my beloved university that much more. So until next time, y'all take care of yourselves, take care of each other, take care of your families, and go Dogs!
Told them, how about them fucking dogs? That's what I told them.